So my name is Tuani, but everybody calls me Tucci, so please call me Tucci too. And I'm an engineer here at Mercari and also director of WWCode Tokyo. And today I'm going to talk about evolving software development from beginner to professional. So my talk is actually not so much about my career, but more about steps that you can take to, if you're learning to how to do software development, programming, that you can move from a beginner level to understand how software development is done in companies as a professional. And I couldn't avoid the Pokemon analogy, sorry. Oh yeah, I already introduced myself, but yeah. Tutti Q online, you can find me. I'm from Brazil, and I major in computer engineering back in Brazil. And I've been a software engineer since 2011, so roughly 7 years now. Engineer at Mercari, director at WWCode Tokyo, yes. And this is my dog, because yeah, you don't need a picture of me, so there's my dog for you. Speaking of WWCode Tokyo, shameless advertising here really quickly. So we are running events about twice a month, and please scan the QR code or send an email to tokyo@WWCode.com if you want to get involved, because as you know, this kind of events require a lot of time, and we are run by volunteers and donations and sponsorship of amazing companies like this one. No bias at all. We need help to scale, to run more events. We want to run like study sessions for all different kinds of programming languages. So if you know any programming language and you want to mentor on our study sessions, that would be awesome. And if you're not so sure about your level, don't worry, because they say teaching is the best way to learn. So it is. Just go ahead and try. And yeah. If none of that convinces you that we are a great organization and you should get involved, we also have pizza on our meetings. That is true. This is a picture of our meeting. Still some time to scan this QR code and get involved. Okay, let's start now. So yeah, my trajectory. I was born in Brazil, was raised in Brazil, worked in São Paulo for some time. Then I moved to London and then to Tokyo, all for working as a software engineer. And I worked in companies as small as 15 people startups and as big as multinational companies with more than 400,000 employees like Bosch and Samsung. And teams as small as 3 people to larger ones as 13 people in the same team. And I made things from simple web pages to complex multi-app platforms, softwares from 300, 5,000 or millions of users. So I kind of have like some experience in different team sizes and different like software sizes as well. This is all to give some background on what I'm going to talk about now. And this is a disclaimer of this presentation, that I'm going to be talking about controversial topics here. One of them is like development process, code readability, design patterns and best practices. And a lot of the content is opinion-based, and there are a lot of counter-arguments for a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say. But yeah, those are opinions, I guess, and things that after some time of experience you start agreeing or disagreeing. Okay, so usually the flow of working in a software project, especially when you're beginning, is like you write some code, then you commit your changes and push to a repository, I hope. Then you deploy your code to the cloud, and then you have a live app. Those were the steps to make Google. Yeah, no, just kidding. I have no idea. But this is very simple, a very simple process, right? Now let's add some complexity to that. For example, if my project starts getting bigger and I have more files in it, things start changing. Like, for example, why do I have a menu.js and a menu2.js? What exactly is the difference between them? No one knows. So for example, I'm working on this project and I decided that I want to create the search feature. So I create the search.js file. That makes sense. I'm going to put the search logic there. What I don't know is that my coworker, Maria, also started working on a different search, and she decided to call itemSearch.js. There you go. You already have some problems in the code organization here. You don't know where the search logic is anymore. It's all divided into different places. If you scale that, you start having like lots and lots of files and lots of people working on it, and you start adding like redundancy, bugs, conflicts, inconsistencies, because if you don't organize, it doesn't scale very well. And so how can we scale efficiently? So there are some points that companies usually go through that is like structuring teams and processes. And you gotta reduce the knowledge sharing bottleneck. And we can do that by having an organized and intuitive code base and having documentation. And also to scale the efficiency of your software development process, you have to have quality assurance and automate the repetitive tasks, which sounds obvious for software development, automation, but is not as obvious when you go to big projects. Let's start by reducing the knowledge sharing bottleneck. I'm not going to talk about all of those items because I don't have a lot of time, but I'll go over some of them. So code organization, so you can scale the code base properly, goes into some topics like design patterns, coding style guide, and best practices. As I said, whoever had this fight, tab versus spaces? No one? Yeah, I see one there. Yeah. Just Lena shouting, tabs! Everything else is wrong. Yeah. So let's start with design patterns. Design patterns are basically ways to split the code into smaller parts. So you have more defined responsibilities, and you can also use well-known patterns in the market, which reduces the knowledge sharing bottleneck, which is easier to find people that already know those patterns. And also, if you find people that don't know, it's easier to find study material, learning resources online, because they're already like patterns. One of the most famous one is MVC. Who is familiar with MVC here? Okay, some people. Yeah, cool. So MVC is basically dividing your code into 3 different components: model, view, and controller. That's what MVC stands for. And just really quickly, models will be, for example, the part of the code that is responsible for manipulating the data and having the business logic. So the classes that will touch the database, basically. View, as the name says, is like the UI, the screens, the pages, the HTML, if you're doing web. And controllers are basically the components that will do the communication between those two, like get the requests from the view and send it to the models, trigger some behaviors, get some data, show in the view, those kind of organizations. So this is one design pattern. There are several others, but they help you dividing your code into smaller parts, so things are easier to find and understand. Yeah, sometimes just MVC, for example, is not enough, and still your models and your controllers get quite big. So there are other ways to reduce too much logic in the same place. I'll have to go really fast through this. Sorry. Yeah, those are the problems of having very big classes or big files with code. It's harder to find the logic when you're looking at the file structure. It's harder to understand what's going on. The components are too specific and less reusable. And it's harder to break the app into separate modules if you need to distribute your system or something. And it's harder to unit test. Some ways to extract the logic. For example, mixins, value objects, service objects, policy objects, there are too many ways. It's easy to find this online if you're looking into organizing your code. Really quickly going over mixins. Mixins, for example, is when you pull sets of methods from your one large class into a module or interface that you can include into other classes to reuse. But if you just pull out a bunch of methods that have nothing to do with each other and put it in another file, then you're just putting the mess somewhere else. So it's kind of like getting a messy room and putting everything into drawers, but still very disorganized and you cannot find anything. So the proper way would be to remove and put into a mixin contain behavior. For example, notification methods that you want a lot of other classes to implement the notification system. Value objects is like when a lot of languages already have those objects, like date or time or URL. Those are classes that represent a value. So if your business have some values that you can encapsulate into a class, that's a good way of breaking your classes into smaller parts. For example, phone, address, currency, rating, score, color, anything like that. I'll give a quick example here. This class item used to have like picture, picture description, position, name, price, color, and a bunch of methods to deal with all those things. And it's fine while the class is still this size, but when it starts getting bigger and bigger and it has like 700 lines, you cannot find anything anymore. So it's a good idea to break it down into smaller parts. Like picture has its own contained class with like the attributes that a picture has and the methods to manipulate a picture. Same thing with color. And then the item would just have relations with those classes, like has many pictures or has one color, something like that. I'm going to skip service objects because it's going to take too long. But yeah, it's another way of breaking down some specific responsibility into separate classes. You can look it up. Okay, coding style guide. This is basically to increase the speed of writing code and also making things more standardized and easy to read. So you have a coding style guide that will tell you if you have to use camel case or snake case, right? So if you have a standard throughout the code, you don't have to think or look at other files and like, oh, what exactly should I do? Should I do like class name camel case or should I use snake case? You don't have to wonder or look around. You have a standard in the whole code that everybody follows. And also like it gives you some things that you don't have to guess. If you have a pattern for constants that all constants are in uppercase, then you look to a variable and already know, oh, this is a constant, okay? Things like that. There are some examples, like Google has its styles guides, some style guides for some languages up on their site. You can check it out. It's probably a good style to follow, Google's. And this another one is the Ruby style guide that will tell things like that, like when you have too many things in the same line, and will tell you exactly what is the good way to write. And best practices. There are some known best practices like the single responsibility principle that goes into like separating classes as well, separating files as well. Like one class or method or component should have only one responsibility. So this also avoid your files of getting too big and having too much logic into it. Dry, don't repeat yourself. Whoever heard of that? Dry? Quite a few people, yeah. So this is basically make your classes, your methods, your components in a way that they are reusable. So you don't copy and paste and change a little bit all the time. So if you're copy and pasting with little alteration, it could probably be a reusable function or module or something. So we call that like drying your code. And there are many others. I like the Boy Scout rule. Leave the campground cleaner than you found it. It's basically like you're working on a file and like, well, there's some messy code here. Well, since you're already there, might as well just clean a little bit. A little bit. You don't, I mean, like, it's also a good practice not to change everything that is not related to your changes. But just a little bit should be fine. Okay, another thing that is, so all those things are things that, like, when you're a beginner working on your own project, you don't really care about because you're the only one looking at that code, right? And if it breaks, well, it's just your personal project. There are not millions of users using it, so no one's gonna like really complain about it. But when you go and work for a company that you have a product in production you have to care about, and you're working on a team, people have to understand your code as well. And another thing that it's really necessary is quality assurance, because you don't want to, like, every time that you ship code, you break production. Yeah, companies cannot afford that. So there's something called unit or integration tests that you can write in your code to make sure that your changes don't break anything else. You can do a big refactor, and if all your tests passes, if your tests are well written and cover all the cases that they should, it will guarantee that your refactor didn't break a lot of the stuff that's already there. And there are also tools for monitoring real time. Like this one is New Relic, but there are other tools as well that you can check, like monitor your servers, your requests, your database calls, if things are getting too slow, or if there's an exception that is happening all the time. If it breaks, you're gonna know fast. And automation of repetitive tasks as well. This is something that a lot of companies implement. It's continuous integration and continuous delivery, which means that every time that you make a change in the code, you have a set of scripts that are run through your change and check a lot of things, like if the tests are still working, if it's able to deploy, it will like automatically deploy, for example, to a test environment. And continuous delivery is the continuous release of changes. So like every time you make a change, you don't have to manually go to a release process. A lot of companies automate that. This is Angry Jenkins. I really like him. Jenkins is one of the tools used for automation. I'm pretty sure people that have been working with software development have heard of it. And they have an artwork page only with like variations of the Jenkins mascot, which is pretty interesting. And this is Circle CI, another tool for automation. And yeah, still on the automation, remember when I mentioned about coding a style guide and like checking indentation, or if you're using like commas, or if you're using tabs or spaces? How boring would it be if we were to review other like teammates' code and we have to check for everything all the time? Like, hey, you use 2 spaces here. We are using 4. It would be very boring. So luckily, there are tools that will automatically check that for you. And they're called linters. And there are safety checkers as well. Like, you forgot to check this null pointer exception here. And they will analyze your code in real time, and sometimes in real time if you set up, and will give you all the warnings of how to write good code. So this is also very useful. And last but not least, when you're working in a team, in a bigger product or project, it's very important to keep going the knowledge sharing. You're reducing the bottleneck, but knowledge sharing is still necessary. Communication is really, really important to have everyone on the same page and avoid conflicts as well. And the teamwork feeling. So everybody wants to make the product better. They want to work together. They're not writing code just for their own. So that's basically my tips for working in a company. Thank you.